the master, sat by the river and watched the water move. He did not ask whether the water had chosen to flow, nor whether it was finished with its journey. He observed only that it moved, and that its moving was the whole of its purpose. So it is with the one who has received a task from heaven. The task is not a destination but a direction. The work is not a burden placed upon the shoulders by some cruel overseer, but a thread woven into the very fabric of one's becoming. A man who says, "I will complete this," has understood only half the truth. A man who says, "I will not begin unless I can complete this," has understood nothing at all. But the man who says, "I cannot rest while this remains undone, though I may never see its ending," that man has touched the hem of wisdom and felt its weight. There is a great and terrible freedom that the foolish man mistakes for license. He sees the open road and believes that because no wall stands before him, he may sit down wherever he pleases. He reasons, "The wall has not stopped me, therefore I am free to stop myself." Times, but this is the freedom of the river that abandons its banks and calls the spreading ruin its liberation. True freedom is not the absence of obligation, but the embrace of one's rightful motion. Confucius did not teach that a man must chain himself to his desk, until the work is perfected and the scroll complete. He taught that a man must never pretend, to himself or to heaven, that the work does not exist. The moment one abandons what is unfinished without grief, without the ache of incompletion, one has begun to die inwardly, not all at once, but by the slow and imperceptible vanishing of the self that was worthy of the task. Consider the student who opens the book of rites and reads until the candle gutters. He has not memorized every passage. He has not illuminated every obscurity, but he has not closed the book out of weariness or distraction or the comfortable lie that he will return to it tomorrow, knowing he will not. He has closed it because the night has made further reading impossible, and he has left a ribbon at the place where understanding ceased. That ribbon is a promise. That ribbon is the whole of his integrity made visible. The work is not finished, but he has not abandoned it. Between these two conditions, incompletion and abandonment, there is a moral distance as vast as the distance between a man who weeps at a grave and a man who has forgotten there was ever someone to mourn. The ancient kings did not build their great walls in a single season. The wall was the inheritance of generation after generation, each adding its stones not knowing whether the wall would ever be complete in their lifetime, each adding nonetheless with the full weight of their devotion. Did the third dynasty builder feel diminished because he could not see the finished rampart? No, he felt the solemnity of continuation. He was the custodian of a purpose larger than his years. This is the teaching hidden inside the teaching. We are never truly the authors of the works we begin. We are their first servants. The work belongs to something beyond us, to the community that needs it, to the future that will receive it, to the principle of order and beauty that called it into being before we ever picked up the brush. Now hear this well, for it is the place where many have stumbled and called their stumbling wisdom. There are men who say, "I will not begin what I cannot finish," for to leave a thing incomplete is a form of dishonesty. Times they mean well. They imagine they are being scrupulous, but they are, in truth, using the fear of imperfection as a fortress against the demand of action. They sit comfortable inside their incompletion of having never begun, and they tell themselves they are merely being careful. Confucius would look upon such a man with a sorrow he could barely conceal. For it is not the unfinished bridge that drowns travelers. It is the bridge never laid that leaves them standing helpless at the bank. To withhold your beginning because you fear your ending is to mistake paralysis for principle. And yet, and here the teaching doubles back upon itself like a river encountering stone, we must be equally vigilant against the man who begins with noise and ceremony, and then, the moment the work grows difficult or unrewarded, sets it down with a philosophical shrug and says, "I was never required to finish it anyway." Times this man is more dangerous than the one who never began, because he has consumed the hope and attention of those who watched him start. He has eaten the bread of expectation and left the table without nourishment. The principle that one is not required to finish is not a permission slip for the faint of will. It is a comfort for the genuinely exhausted, the genuinely overwhelmed, the genuinely broken, who have given what they had and find the task still stretching before them. It is medicine, not license. Medicine taken by a healthy man in place of food makes him ill. What then does the superior man do when he stands in the middle of an enormous work and feels his strength failing? He does what every good craftsman has done since the first tool was lifted. He marks the place. He looks behind him at what has been accomplished with clear eyes and neither false pride nor false despair. He looks before him at what remains and does not flinch from its scale, but does not pretend it is smaller than it is. And then, this is the whole of it, the kernel of the teaching. He hands the work forward, either to his student, or to his successor, or to his own self on the following morning, refreshed. The handing forward is not abdication. The handing forward is the most sacred act of stewardship. It says, I received this from someone who could not complete it. I tend it now. I will pass it onward when I must. It will be completed by hands I will never shake. And I call that not my failure, but my contribution to something that outlives me. Times, the tree does not apologize for not becoming the forest, but the tree would be condemned in the eyes of heaven if it refused to put down roots because it knew it could not cover all the earth with shade. Every root is an act of faith in continuation. Every root says, after me, another. Times, the sage knows this. The sage does not grip the work as though his hands were the only hands in history. He holds it firmly enough that it does not fall, loosely enough that the next pair of hands can take it up. There is a particular kind of pride. Confucius saw it in the ministers of his time, the ones who kept knowledge locked inside themselves for fear that sharing it would diminish their power. That is perhaps the greatest enemy of all great work. The work is not yours. It was never yours. You arrived at it after it already existed in the mind of heaven, and you will leave it before it reaches its completion in the world. Here is a paradox that the students would sometimes bring to the master, hoping to confuse him, and instead confusing themselves when he answered without hesitation. They asked, if we are not required to finish, why begin with full effort? Why not preserve yourself for the length of the journey? Times, and the master would look at them for a moment in a way that made them feel they had asked why the sun bothers to be bright when it will set by evening. One does not calibrate one's effort to the length of one's tenure. One gives fully to the work that is before one now, because the work before one now is all that actually exists. The future work will be done by a future self. The past work is already in the care of time. This moment's task demands this moment's whole attention and this moment's whole strength. Anything less is not conservation of energy. It is theft from the present to pay a future debt that may never come due. 10,000 men have died with their greatest work unfinished. We do not remember them as failures. We remember them as beginners of rivers, as planters of orchards they would never taste, as writers of the first chapters of books that others completed in their spirit if not their hand. What made these men great was not that they finished. What made them great was that they never, not for one season of their lives, pretended the work was not theirs to carry. They carried it until they could not carry it. And even in the laying down, they arranged it carefully so that its weight might be distributed to those who came after. This is the whole difference between a man who is taken by death and a man who abandons his post. One is taken. The other takes himself away. Heaven forgives exhaustion. Heaven is slower to forgive the man who was not yet exhausted. The young nobleman who came to study with Confucius and left after 3 years, saying he had learned enough. That man is a parable. He had learned the forms. He had memorized the rites. He had learned enough to appear learned, but he had not yet learned what could only be learned by staying. The texture of difficulty, the particular flavor of the moment when one wishes to stop and does not. The specific quality of character that is only produced by remaining past the point of comfort. The work was not finished when he left. More importantly, his formation as a man was not finished when he left. And this is the cruelest irony of abandonment. The one who abandons the work loses not only the work's completion, but also the transformation that the continuation of the work would have produced in him. He is robbed twice. He robs himself twice. There are forms of leaving that are not abandonment. The master knew this, and he was careful not to make his students feel that all departure was betrayal. A man who has given 30 years to a great project and whose body has been consumed by that giving. If such a man lays the work down, he has not abandoned it. He has become part of it. His years are embedded in its foundations, like the bones of those who built the great tombs, not entombed by the work but taken up into it, made permanent by it. The work carries him now. He does not need to carry the work. But this transformation, the moment at which the worker becomes part of the work, is not something one can claim prematurely. One cannot say on the third day of labor, "I have given enough. The work now carries me." Times that is not completion. That is not even a beginning. That is the imitation of sacrifice without its substance. The rope that 1,000 hands have frayed does not break by the act of the last hand alone, nor is it preserved by the first hand alone. Every hand that held that rope in the years between, every hand that refused to let it drop when letting it drop would have been so easy and so quiet and so easily forgiven. Every such hand is the reason the rope survived to be held by the hand that finally tied it to the post and said, "The work is done." The final hand receives the glory because it was present at the completion. But the 10,000 hands before it received something more lasting and more real than glory. They received the knowledge that they had not been free to abandon what they had undertaken, and they had honored that unfreedom, and it had made them who they were. That knowledge is not taken away by death. It is not diminished by time. It is the only currency that heaven accepts without discount. So the teaching is not a command to be heroic, and it is not a permission to be lazy. It is something far more precise and far more demanding than either of those. It is an instruction about the relationship between the self and the tasks that come to it. Some tasks come by choice, some come by birth, some come by chance, by proximity, by the simple accident of being the one who was present when the need arose. But once a task has found you, and you have recognized it, once your hands have closed around it, and you have said, even silently, "This is mine to carry," you have entered into a covenant. The covenant does not require your success. The covenant does not require your completion. It requires only your faithfulness. Faithfulness is not the same as perpetual presence. It is the refusal to pretend the covenant does not exist. And in the end, long after the arguments have been made and the illustrations given and the parables unpacked, what remains is this simple image. An old man at a desk in a room where the candle is almost gone, writing in a hand that is no longer steady, finishing a thought he knows he will not finish before the light runs out. He does not stop. He does not pretend the sentence is done before it is done. He does not abandon his pen in despair at the oncoming dark. He writes what he can clearly in the remaining light. He leaves the page where his student will find it. He trusts the student. He trusts the morning. He trusts that the sentence, incomplete as it stands, is more useful than silence, that his trembling attempt is more honest than a tidy stopping, and that the work, this enormous, endless, necessary work, will be carried forward by hands that love it as he loved it, not because they are required to finish, but because they are not free to abandon what has been given into their care.